Listeners do know of the dangers of hay feeding or the potential risk to a certain condition that is quite alarming in horses. And we're also going to go through the shortfalls and the missing nutrients in hay.
Balances against whether it's a Rhodes grass hay, whether you want to incorporate some lucerne, whether you've got a teff or you've got a native pasture in Victoria. So we've done a lot of the legwork.
Welcome everyone to episode 125 of the Send Nutrition Podcast. You're with your host Bryan Peter today, and in this episode it is titled Hay Feeding Dangers and Shortfalls. How are you, Peter?
Bryan, I'm very well, but after hearing that intro, I think our listeners are going to be scared.
We're trying not to alarm our listeners, but highlighting the danger, and hopefully our listeners do know of the dangers of hay feeding or the potential risk to a certain condition that is quite alarming in horses. And we're also going to go through the shortfalls and the missing nutrients in hay that are required to top up, particularly for those performance horses to achieve the best in their discipline. I
think there's a lot of noise in the industry, Bryan, and everyone's sort of saying one thing, doing another thing. And then, my friend did this, my cousin did that. And people just had a bit of a loss. And especially this time of the year where obviously, the winter time is behind us and we're starting to get into a change of season. This is a very critical time to get your diet right.
I think this is also highlighted with the diet analysis that are coming through. I think we're going at a rate nearly 150 a month, and sometimes our pens are running out trying to note down what is included in the diet, what some owners are not telling us, and we get it out on the phone. But even we're seeing these reports from other companies or nutritionists that the owner is contacting us, not getting the result, and then we're bringing it back and trying to make sense of it all for their environment and going the Sen mantra and the way we feed to get that result. And I think the ones from July, they've already contacted us back, and many said that we've changed their lives, we've simplified it, and they've seen the change in their horse in that 4 to 5 week period.
The biggest difference, Bryan, between what we offer in terms of our solution to what an independent nutritionist sort of, can do for that same customer is the independent nutritionist still has to go out and analyze all the different feeds from all the different companies and try to put something together on a 7-8 page, sort of spreadsheet, and it's going to give you a headache after you get to page 7. We sell a balanced diet, and I don't mean sell them physically, sell it down your throat. We've come up with a diet that balances against whether it's a Rhodes grass hay, whether you want to incorporate some lucerne, whether you've got a teff or you've got a native pasture in Victoria. So we've done a lot of the legwork, we've done a lot of the heavy lifting, and that's why I think the diets have been so popular that we sort of can't keep up. I think we're coming up to sort of 7 to 10 or even 14 days sort of booked up in advance, yeah?
Yeah, we're getting on top of it at the moment, and it's no knock to the nutritionist, but what we're trying to do is you can have everything in balance on paper, but these are animals. It's nearly an art as much as it is a science, and whether it's their metabolism, whether it's genetics, with the way they're treated in their environment, it's just trying to find answers and getting those puzzle pieces together, identifying the shortfalls, but also this management. And we're going to highlight the management of how critical hay is in a horse's diet. And we know it is because we need that long stem roughage at a minimum of 1.5% body weight per day. So for a 500 kg horse, 7.5 kgs. And coming around this time, how some pastures are died off, we are leaning on our hays. And we're going to show you some best practice of how to use and transition these hays, because this danger, the hay feeding dangers, it's to do with one of the leading causes of death in horses, and that's colic. And we're going to show you the link between hay and colic in this episode.
I think how we got to this podcast was obviously, feedback and the hundreds of diets that we've done. And the common denominator was that a lot of people, mainly the foundation was that they were feeding hay. So if the horse is getting 6, 7, 8 kilograms of hay, and then the rest of the hard feed or supplements that you're feeding goes against what's in the hay, this is where you can run into some heavy problems.
Yeah, and the only way we know is through a hay analysis. Otherwise, everyone is best guessing. But we know and have profiled through a lot of hay types and species. We look at this, we look at how we balance it with the shortfalls and balance it with our feeds and supplements, and we'll just go straight to getting pretty heavy in this. Why we could be, and it's that K word I don't like using, like killing them with kindness. So our kindness comes from giving them all this roughage, which really helps them thrive and this hay amount. And that's the kindness we give them. But the silent K in this is colic. And this can come about if you do not transition your hay batches like you transition a hard feed to another hard feed. And what I mean about this is buying your hay 1 month in advance, 2 months and 3 months, you should still have some hay left over between batches to mix half and half, because the microbes have to adjust. And there are studies that show that changes in hay and hay types and analysis can increase the risk of colic by 5 to 10 times because of the 2 to 3 weeks it takes for the microbes to adjust. So the best practice and what we need every horse owner to know is that you need to keep some of your older hay, get other hay that has been tested, hopefully, or someone or a supplier that's been trusted, and over that 2 to 3 week period, have some older hay there. So it's not so much of a shock to the microbes in the hindgut, but then that's what the research is showing, that switching it too quick, so just going out of one batch to another batch, can cause colic. And then it's something that every horse owner wants to avoid, and it's actually something so simple and needs to be highlighted.
Yeah, that's extremely well said. And probably a real life example of that was when we went overseas a couple of months ago to Asia and eating different food, eating different bacteria. You know, I got sick. I was sort of, in bed, the number ones and number twos, everything sort of just in a pretty bad way for 24 hours. And I wish I'd taken my probiotics then, obviously, to help that. And what it would have been my gut microbes were not used to the microbes in that particular country, maybe that particular food. There was some sort of reaction. So if you have used up all your hay and you've got no choice but to go into the new season hay, what we would recommend at centres, even if you do a course of the extra balance, so we've got the probiotics, we've got the prebiotics, we've got the toxin binder, we've got the marine calcium, magnesium. What that product will do is that product will help that transition from the old hay that had X amount of sugar, X amount of protein, X amount of fiber, to the new hay, which might be substantially different. It might be freshly cut, so the sugar is going to be high compared to the old one, and the shock to the horse's system is not going to be as strong or as intense if you've got that product to help lessen that transitional load.
Yeah, 100%, Peter. It's about lowering the risk, and those parts that Peter outlined is helping lower that risk, because the immune system, 70% is in the hindgut. If the microbes are unbalanced, they could be really susceptible in this period. And this transition from old to new batches of hay, it just helps the microbes not go into shock and gets them assimilated with this new batch. And then a good practice would be buying 3 months in advance. So you're only doing this change 2 to 3 or 4 times a year rather than every month. And then imagine just buying hay, and even from the same supplier, we know different batches from the same farm can have different protein levels, different sugars and starches, just depending on the environment and the way it's been treated in those big farms.
Yeah, I think our listeners have got a couple of options. And as Bryan rightly said, if you have got the option, try to do it every 3 months and have a little bit of old left over. I know sometimes it's impossible, especially if your horse is at adjustment, and the people there, obviously, they've got their supply, whether they've get it from a store, whether they get it, they grow it themselves. It's never a one size fits all. So you got to be prepared for all the different sort of things that might come sort of in your way.
And another thing to really zero down is on the profile of hays. So at Sen, we recommend a Rhodes grass, which is a subtropical grass that has this protein profile around that 10, 11%. And for example, and this could be a little bit of an extreme example, you can't get it. And then you're going down to the hay part of your produce and you pick up some oaten hay. Now, I've profiled a lot of oaten hay that is around in Feed Central at the moment, and its protein is around 5%, 6%. So if your horse, you've kept them on the same hard feed ration, switched it to oaten hay, and their top line drops off, or their muscles are not being supported with their protein per day, which is around that in maintenance, around 600 grams, which is typically, if they're ingesting 7 kgs of Rhodes grass, that's really hitting it. It's not overdoing it. Obviously, you've got performance horses, broodmares need double that. But in this case, you're actually shortcutting the protein intake in your horse without knowing, because you've just switched hays, but it's silent because we're not aware of this and you're not aware of the hay analysis. So I think if you're serious about feeding, knowing what hay and the hay is being tested by the supplier is so vital.
On the flip side too, Brian, if you use the Rhodes grass as an example, and look down south, it might be a teff hay, a cock's foot as well, even a native pasture sort of towards Victoria. If you work off that, 10, 11, sort of 12% for the Rhodes grass, and if we do a 180 and go, all right, well, we're going to now put that horse on a prime lucerne, okay, and that might be from 25 to 35%. So now you're getting double the protein, and that horse it's a shock to the system. So what happens if it's not going to use that protein? It's got to excrete it, and the way that it excretes it is through urine. So basically, your horse is going to urinate a lot more. If it can't keep up with the excretion, the urine's going to get darker and darker, and God forbid it gets onto like a white pasty sort of urine. That's when you're starting to aggravate that kidney, and you don't want to be in that space for a very long time, because that can lead to kidney failure.
Yeah, that's well said, Peter. And it's just that unnecessary load on a horse that maybe in performance a little bit stressed. They're trying to recover from this, but then you've got that load on that organ. It just really upsets that balance, and you've got to take in the whole diet. So if you say you're at 2 kgs of our Sen Ultimate at 14%, that's contributing a little bit to that protein portion of the diet, but the majority is coming from your hays, and that's why you see us recommend the ones that want to feed lucerne. It's a grassy lucerne at 30%, maximum 50. If you do feed that through, you're at the top range of your protein. Maybe you need it for calcium for your oxalate pastures, but it's a better balance. Feeding prime lucerne as the only source without pasture there is just really heavy on the horse due to that protein content, and it's such a contrast to the cereal grain hays that we see it like that 5-6% protein.
Brian, even what you just said gives me a headache thinking about it. And the poor people are trying to balance these diets, these diets themselves. And you've got the own example at 6%. You've got a grassy lucerne at 30-35. Our grain-free ultimate stays the same at that protein level. It's between 13 and 14%. So if you're going to feed a kilogram of our grain-free ultimate and you're going to give it 6 kilograms of a prime lucerne, your protein is going to be through the roof. But then if you're going to feed the oaten, it might be under protein. So you got to feed a bit more of the ultimate. And this is what we do at our diet analysis. We actually go through, analyze it, take you through it, and balance the diet for you.
Yep. And speaking of hay analysis in this way, the hay analysis is quite, would you say, be a little bit confusing. And if it confuses us in the start after we've had to research it over the years, I think for some horse owners it can be a bit overwhelming. And let's just try and get to what we're trying to achieve through this. And you'll see common conditions like hay belly and why they come about. And it really comes down to that hay quality. And what we mean by that is the digestibility. So when you look at hays, if they contain a lot of cellulose, lignin, those portions of the plant, these are harder to digest for the horse. So we're trying to get a measurement of this, and Feed Central do a really good job with their hay analysis. And you can look up the quality reports online and search what's available out there and potentially buy some. But there's two terms. So you've got the neutral detergent fiber, so NDF, and also the ADF, which is the acid detergent fiber. And the way these percentages come across are so kind of not misleading, but you would think it's a range from 0 to 100. And our default way of thinking in human terms is 100 is good, 0 is better. But even when we try and explain it here, we'll try and make it a little bit simple and give you some ranges to work off. So when we look at the NDF for the start, that is basically how much or how digestible that hay is. And we've got some good ranges that Peter will go through now, and then I'll try and come and explain further from that percentage.
Yeah, so without complicating it sort of too much, what you want to do is you want to try to stick to the average. So rather than, oh, well, it's 1 point lower or it's 1 point higher. So the average NDF, what you want is you want to average it between 54 and 60, like as a percentage. And as Bryan said, it's sort of not out of 100. That's just the range that obviously the labs recommend. Like the better the NDF, obviously the lower. So anything less than 50 is really good, but 54 is still within the average. So, if you're at 51 or if you're at 61, argument's sake, 61, like you're still just over the average. So don't think it's going to be poor quality. Where it probably gets a bit extreme is when it's 80. So that's 20 points above the average. So the lower the better. Anything below 50 is really good. You don't want to be feeding anything more than 70. So, best case, like if you just want the optimum hay below 50, you wouldn't give it, to your cows or anything, probably above 70. But a good ballpark figure between 54 and 60%.
Yeah, that's well explained, Peter. When you look at these percentages, it's like a mix of that indigestible and digestible fiber portions of the hay, and that's where you get these mid-road percentages where you need that mix for that flow of digestible matter through the horse's hindgut in particular. And when you look at how fiber is digested down to volatile fatty acids, which help serve as energy for the horse, it's really important to get this balance right, and these percentages really highlight this. And then when you look at the other type, so the acid detergent fiber, this is related to the digestibility of the feed also, and it measures the indigestible portion of the plant. So the lower this is, the better. And low means not zero. It actually means less than 40. And what you want to avoid is any ADFs above 55, 60. And that would really show that it's a very poor or indigestible portion of that hay part.
I can see why it's confusing even for us, because like in an ideal world, you'd want, if the hay is 80% digestible, you'd want to see an 80% digestible number, where we've got to work off, well, below 40 is extremely good, and above 60 is not very good. So it's very frustrating. I can imagine, obviously, people listening to this going, what the hell, what drugs are these guys on, maybe? But we're just trying to make it, into layman's terms so people can understand it.
Yeah, and because hay is such an important portion of the diet, it needs to be right. And when you look at even the crude protein in hays, if it's around that 4, 5, 6%, it's not going to support the horse's body. Like, you're going to be under that NRC range, even feeding 10 kgs at a time of that hay. So it needs to be topped up around and balanced. And that's where we come in. We look at every part of your diet, trying to look at if you do have your hay analysis. If you don't, we try and estimate. And we see that it is that kind of trial and error, and then that way that you look at the horse physically and see how it responds. And when you look at how far we've come in the last 10 years at helping the horse be more comfortable, when we center around this hindgut, they will have better energy, they will feel better, and all this is required for a horse to thrive.
You mentioned, Bryan, briefly about hay belly, and the way obviously, if it is hay belly or it's not hay belly, obviously it's pretty obvious, but chances are you're feeding a NDF, it might be more than 70, and an ADF less than 40. Hay belly is actually very poor nutritionally balanced hay, or even roughage or whatever that is. And on the flip side, I think I came back with hay belly from Italy, but I put it down to the 80 pizzas and 100 litres of Prosecco I drank in a week.
You came back really tan too, so you must have been doing that on the beach, Pete.
Even worse, Bryan.
But, and you still hold that tan to today, and you've been back for a while. But I think like that hay belly related to the hay is so important in terms of also your exercising the horse. It can be a sign of parasites or other health conditions, but I think the most commonly seen is with that poor quality forage. And as we've gone through, now you can identify this, and if you're still confused, you can book one of our diet analysis and we can take you through your hay test that you have done. But then we can also estimate what region, what you have in front of you But then it all comes back to all that management around your hay, the 3 months buying in advance, because that will help lower the risk of colic.
Bryan, maybe just to finish off and sort of summarise too, let's just maybe give the people a bit of a take-home message with basically the hays. All the hays lack 3 key nutrients. Should we just go maybe just over quickly, one by one for the 3?
Yeah, I think that's really important, because for a horse to thrive in performance, they can't just rely on that hay. We've never seen a hay that has sufficient zinc and copper per kg. They do have enough iron in there, but then we've got other parts and other nutrients it lacks, because you're kind of trying to bring them out of that natural environment with the pasture, but then bring them into a domestic setting for their performance. But even so, pasture has its shortfalls, so this applies to this as well.
Bryan, this shocked me. Fresh grass basically is deficient in salt. So we've known this, but I didn't realise that majority of the fresh pastures were deficient in salt. And if you ask yourself the question why, well, then you go like, well, it's a major electrolytes in the blood, and it's lost in large amounts in the sweat, also urine, manure, and even tears. And that's what really, really got me, even through tears. But when you look at it, it's liquid. It makes total sense.
Yeah, 100%. And when you look at the whole electrolyte profile of a hay, it has enough potassium, as we can see, but feeding that salt, there's not enough in your hard feed in that pellet form, because we're trying to get other vital minerals in there, but then we add our macrobiotic salt on top to really top that up at the minimum 25 grams. But if you're in performance, we try and run off that 10 grams per 100 kg. You can't really overdo it, because your kidneys are filtering this hourly, and they will normalize the blood.
It was a bit scary, some of the diets I've done. The people were not feeding salt at all. So I'm sort of thinking, well, the horse is probably at a shortfall. It might be getting just enough, or maybe just under out of pasture or hay. So you've got to be really careful that you get that salt at the bare minimum, as Bryan said.
I think one of the examples I could probably pull from one of the diet analysis was, my horse has been prone to colic in the past. And then we went through it, and there was no sign of salt anywhere. And salt is really important to activate their thirst, the hydration, to pull water into the cells. That movement of digestible matter through that whole digestive tract can really heighten, if there's not enough hydration, impaction colic. And that is the risk. And it's just a simple addition to a diet that can be very vital for the horse.
The Sen macrobiotic horse salt is the only macrobiotic salt on the market. We've got the 88 trace elements in there as well. So in a lot of cases, it might even save you feeding any electrolytes that you might be feeding from other companies. It's not as salty as what the normal salts are. The normal salts are 99.5% sodium chloride. We average around about the 95, 96, where the other sort of 4-5% is those trace minerals. That's why it's not as salty.
Yeah, and the salt is balancing that electrolyte shortfall in your hay, because you've got your potassium, you've also got your calcium levels, which can come from your hard feed, but also some from the hay, depending on your hay type as well. And with all this, it's all salt before adding another electrolyte on top.
Yeah, absolutely, Bryan. It's well summarised. Bryan, vitamin E, how is that a key component?
Well, vitamin E, and I think it has been throughout the years been touted as the key antioxidant for a horse. And what we look at is, yes, vitamin E is abundant in fresh grass, but is rapidly lost when it goes through that cut and that baling process. And what is it required? It's really required for a horse to recover the antioxidants in the cell membranes. And this is important for heart, skeletal muscle, immune system health, but also nerve systems. And when you look at how feeds are designed these days, and it's not our feed, but other feeds, there could be unnecessary free radicals within it or oxidation. So you need an antioxidant to bring or to neutralize that in the horse for recovery. But if you get your feeding right and your foundations right, then it can be used to help recover the muscles, which is what you need for the performance horse.
Bryan, and the third and final key nutrient that's lacking in hay is omega-3, 6 and 9.
So when you look at the hays, fresh pasture has that missing link of the omega-3, and it's always higher than the omega-6 and the omega-9. And what we want to try and do is get a higher balance of omega-3 to omega-6 in every diet, because this is a more anti-inflammatory profile. And as that baling and cutting process happens, that omega-3 level drops in the hay. And the best way to access a high-quality plant-based omega-3 in the diet at the right ratios is through our sen oil, which is the first cold-press flaxseed oil.
Bryan, it's very well said and absolutely right. It's a much better profile to the vegetable oils, or it might be the corn oils or the soybean oils. Omega-6 is actually really easy to reach and hit those numbers in the horse diet, basically, because it comes through grain. So basically, any other feeds or a lot of feeds do contain some omega-6, which is easily hit. But omega-3 needs to be 3 times higher than omega-6. So if we look at the sen oil, it's got a very comparable omega-3 to omega-6 ratio to fresh pasture. When that hay dries, obviously, pasture gets baled, turns into hay. The longer that it dries, the quicker the omega-3, obviously, deficiency happens. And if you are on a hay-only diet and the horse is not getting any omega-3 supplements, over time it will be deficient. And omega-3, the horses cannot manufacture or produce naturally, so that needs to get supplemented.
It's totally essential, and as a horse has evolved on this, we try and look at the other omega-3 sources that are being touted. And yes, you've got your fish oil sources, and what we find is we're uncomfortable feeding this due to rancidity, the quality that can come through, but also the naturalness of it, because it could down-regulate conversions of those specific fatty acids that is required by the horse. And I think if we stick to what nature has evolved the horse on, that plant-based source, and a really high-quality one that comes in our sen oil, which is the first cold press, it has the least oxidation out of all the oils due to the preparation, has high anti-inflammatory properties, and it is the market-leading and most popular oil on the market for horses in Australia.
That's well summarised, Bryan. And just one final fact from myself. Horses are herbivores, so they're not naturally ever eat DHA and EPA, the active form found in fish oil. Fish oil is therefore more like a medicine, in my opinion, and it should be used in small amounts under veterinary guidance.
Yeah, that's well said, Peter. And when we look at, say, the EMS horses and those ones prone to laminitis, this is even more crucial with your hay diets, and you have to really zero in on that WSC. You got to look at the starch as well in the hay, so that whole NSC. And when you look at hays, you should really be sticking to the roads for this. Otherwise, you will be soaking or trying to soak the sugars out of, say, an oaten hay, for example. I've got a profile here, WSC content of 30%. The starch is quite low, but that sugar content is through the roof. And when you look at a horse's, even their dental and that chewing action, if it's chewing all that sugar every day, we know what happens to humans. And we have a lot of equine dentists who have called us and said, thank you for promoting that native grass and that low sugar, low starch hays.
And this is even more reason why we need to balance that diet, because you might be feeding a feed and you're going, oh, well, it's got X amount of sugar, X amount of starch, and it might be in a safe zone, but yet you're feeding that hay at 30% combined sugar and starch, and the blame's going to the hard feed, but it's the actual hay that the horse is consuming majority of its calories from that's the culprit.
Yeah, and it's the degree of their metabolic disorder as well. There's so many various degrees. You can hit those percentages and still not have the desired result. So it's looking at every puzzle piece of your horse's diet, definitely getting that hay analysis from your supplier, because it's just going to be crucial. But there's another thing that I've just thought about in terms of, you can get that hay analysis from your supplier, but they may only just do certain parts of the batch and then blanket and say, oh, the protein is sufficient 17% or 12%. When in actual fact it could be 5%. So you really don't know for sure. And Feed Central do offer that service of sending in your hay and getting it tested. It can be a little bit costly. And that's why we do encourage horse owners to buy up 3 or 4 months worth, store it, and then that's the best practice if your pasture is not sufficient.
If you're more confused now after the podcast than what you were before, join the club. We're here to help. Yeah. So this is why we've got the free diet analysis. Please get in early, because the spots are filling up pretty quickly. We'll do all the running around. We'll do all the heavy lifting for you. If you have got, obviously, hay analysis, even better when we do the consult, because we can really zero in on the omega-3. It may not be lacking the vitamins and minerals. Bryan mentioned the zinc and copper and iron. Iron's very prevalent and very high in Australian pastures and hays. This is why we've got a chelated zinc and copper inside both our CF50 product and the Ultimate, because we know that iron is going to be high everywhere. So we have a very high zinc and copper to counteract that high iron.
We pride ourselves on quality, and as Peter said, that chelated is better absorbed. This is why we have so many horse owners get the results. It really helps with essentially all parts of the body of the horse, including their color. It can influence that. So you need to get that balance right from the start for their hoof health, for the immune system, skin and coat health. And I think one of the biggest take-home messages we want our listeners to understand is we do transition our hard feeds. So in these diet consults we've been performing, it's not going to cold turkey switching to Sen. You have to mix your old feed with your new feed, your new Sen diet, over that 10 to 14 days due to these microbes. But then transferring this also to your hay feeding principles, that you should be transitioning this over the same amount of time when you get a new batch, even if it's from the same supplier, because there's unknowns. You need to keep those microbes happy and in balance and not give them a shock, because that's when that increased risk of colic can happen. And yes, it is a very dangerous condition. And as we all know, we want to avoid it and limit that risk.
Yeah, that's very well summarised, Bryan. Just some parting words from me. Please help us keep this podcast Australia's #1 podcast with over 100,000 listens. I think we're at 83 5-star reviews. Our goal is to have it at 100 within a month. So guys, look, please share it with your family and friends. Put that 5-star on Spotify, on Apple as well. I think we're about 32 or 34 on Apple. So please help us stay at #1.
And also, we thank you for everyone that is demanding us to do these weekly, because this is what we want to help with these topics, really help horse owners understand their horse even better. But while you're cleaning out your stables, while you're going for those long drives, if you haven't had enough of us in this one, we were featured in one of the latest Endurance Chatter podcasts as well. And Ashley and Jolene Cole, they actually really put some hard-hitting questions onto us, more about nutrition and what we have been going on about in also past episodes. So it's a really good review and straight to the point to really help get the best performance out of our horses. And we're getting a lot of inquiries out of the endurance world about this too.
Yeah, I think we've summarised it all, Bryan. Any parting final words you like for our listeners?
No, I think that's about it, Pete. We just thank everyone for their support. If you do have a topic you want us to cover, don't hesitate to get in contact with us. We've got all the usual channels: email, private message. And yeah, if you are still confused after this podcast about your diet, we have this service that we're offering. It's free, there's no obligation, and we are getting the results with it.
Thanks, Bryan. We'll see everyone next week.
Yep, see you guys.
Bye.